No battle was ever won according to plan, but no battle was ever won without one. When a beginner starts their training journey or their powerlifting career, they're often told simply to stick to the program, trust the process, and do as they're told. Now, this is all great advice, but after a little while, there comes a point where the lifter starts to become a little bit more in tune with their body and is able to recognize, trends and patterns in the way the body's responding. And it becomes increasingly important for them to have a bit more say and to have a bit more auto-regulation in their training to maximize their performance and to decrease the risk of injury. So today what we're going to do is talk about how to go off program, what that means, and how it can benefit you and your training. Firstly, what is your training program? Well, it's simply a plan. It's something that's written in advance by definition that outlines what training you should be doing, how much of it, and when. Now, it doesn't matter where you get your program from, whether it's something that you wrote yourself, whether it's something you downloaded from the internet or was given to you by your coach. That plan makes certain assumptions about your abilities or what you're able to do on any given day, and how you might progress through a training block, and a range of other variables that are kind of hard to guess or hard to know really. Now, where this all falls over is that, by definition, as I said, that program is written in advance, but as time goes on, we get new up-to-date information all the time. After every session or within its own session, we're getting new feedback and new sensations that give us new information that may want to make us change our mind as to what would be the best training for that day. So for example, let's say your program was written on a Monday and you're currently training and it's Friday. 4 days have passed since that plan was written, and maybe something's happened in the last 3 days, or maybe something is occurring in your warm-ups or on the day that suggests that what's written on the plan, that was written days ago, mightn't be appropriate or mightn't be the best course of action on the day. Now, it's obviously unfeasible to constantly be changing things or to constantly be waiting for that moment in time to make decisions, which is why programs exist, because it's logical to spend a certain amount of time planning out, blocking out, or making an outline as to the direction that your training wants to go. But things come up, and there's always new information. A perfect example of this is with competition attempts. I can give someone what competition attempts I would like for them to make on the day of the meet, but the most important thing is what's happening on the day. Someone might make a second attempt lift of 150 kilos, and it's kind of bad, and they turn to me and say, "But coach, I did 160 in the gym 2 weeks ago," and I just say, "Well, I don't care," because I saw that 150 and it wasn't very good, and you're not good for 160 today. So we're going to do 155 or something like that, because that second attempt on the day of the competition is the most up-to-date data that you have. And the same thing can be, overlaid on your training. Every day that comes up, or every day that passes, or every rep and set that you do represents new data, new information that you can use to make better decisions about your training moving forward. This is where auto-regulation, or RPE-based training, popularized by Mike Teixeira in powerlifting at least, is the gold standard, because it accommodates for this. There's already some inbuilt auto-regulation. There's already some inbuilt mechanism by which you can change your training stimulus based on how you're feeling or based on how you're performing. So there's no doubt that some level of flexibility is necessary in a training program, especially for someone that's more intermediate or more advanced, in order to get the best out of their training. But how can we go about going off program, or why should we do it, or what's the best way to understand when this might be applicable, and how can we best take advantage of it? Those are the things that we're going to be delving into now. The first thing that I want to say is that the best model that you can apply is one where you train with your coach in person, in real life, during your sessions. Your training program is simply an extension of the mind of the coach. So, those numbers and squiggles on the piece of paper, they're literally just a representation of what the coach believed to be the case at the time that they wrote that program about how you were going to respond or about what was best for you. But if new, up-to-date information comes around, then the coach is more than, in their right or in their position to make changes to the program to best fit the athlete and to, have the best outcome. So being in a position where your coach can be with you is obviously the best. That's the way that we do it at the Strength Fortress. Me and our other coach, Matt, when gyms are open, we're on the gym floor and we're, coaching our lifters, not just watching their sets, but also making adjustments on the fly based on what we see. Because, their program, we might have wrote that a week ago, 3 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, but more important is what we're seeing in real time on the day. So the best way is obviously to have your coach with you. But the next question obviously is, what happens if you don't have your coach with you, or what happens if you're your own coach, or you're doing a program that you've, a template program that you've downloaded online? How and when and why can we go off program, can we go off script to maximize our training? Okay, so now I want to talk about the different ways that we can go off program. Now, there are obviously a huge number of different factors that are involved in a training program, from load to frequency, exercise selection, range of motion, a whole heap of, variables. But the changes that we can make in a program, and I'm not talking about deleting a program and writing a new one. I'm talking about modifications that we make to the plan that's been already written, can essentially be distilled into 3 categories: doing slightly less, doing something more, or doing something different. So we're going to go over these 3 and how they differ and how we can use them. Now, before I go on, I do want to make a clarification or distinction between different training program deliveries. Some programs are delivered in different ways. There are, load prescribed programs. There are RPE or auto-regulation based programs. These principles apply no matter how that program is written, because even in a load prescribed program, there is some element of RPE or expected RPE, at least in the mind of the coach. So there's always scope for these modifications regardless of how your program is written. Okay, so firstly, we're going to talk about doing slightly less. Let's say, for example, your program says that you have to do 3 sets of 6 reps at an RPE 8. Okay, and for you, you're expecting that RPE 8 to be about 100 kilos. You're warming up, and you do 90 for 2 as a warm up, as your last warm up, and it feels really bad. It feels terrible. You might decide, or it might be appropriate, depending on the context of your program, instead of doing 3 sets of 6 at RPE 8, you're going to decide, I'm just going to do them at RPE 7 today. I'm deliberately going to undershoot because of some other factor. Maybe you're really tired, or maybe you went on a big hike on the Sunday. Maybe you're training on Monday, doing your squats on Monday, and you went on a 20-kilometer hike on Sunday, the day before, and your legs are dead, and you're trying to do your squats. And rather than working at the prescribed, intensity or prescribed difficulty or RPE, you're going to deliberately undershoot because you're tired. I would see that as being totally appropriate. Maybe your program says you have to do 5 sets of 3 on an exercise, but you're in a little bit of pain, and your back is getting a little bit more jammed up set to set, and after the 3rd set, you decide to can it. You're like, I'm just going to do these 3 sets and I'm going to call it a day. I'm going to call that a win and move on. Again, I would see that as being totally appropriate, because that 5x3 that was planned was, again, written days before, weeks before, but on the day, you've come across new data, your back's getting jammed up from set to set, that tells you that you should do something different, or tells you that what was initially thought to be appropriate is no longer the case. So doing less generally revolves around mitigating injury risk, or decreasing, overload, or decreasing fatigue, or managing fatigue in a better way. So that's the first way that you can go about doing less in your program, or going off program deliberately. Another way that we can go off program is to do slightly more. So let's say, for example, your program says to do, the opposite of what we said before, 3 sets of 5 at 100 kilos. And, let's say it's a load prescribed program where you're told to do 3 5s at 100, and you're warming up and you do the first set of 5 at 100 and it feels easy. Your coach might have written a note in your program saying, expecting RPE 8. And you do the first set and it was RPE 6. And you're like, coach was wrong. I can do way more than this. You might decide to go up in the next set. You might decide to do 102.5. You might decide to do 105 kilos. And that's a bit closer to what was the expected RPE. Even though your program is a load-based program, here you've gone off program in a way that's appropriate, in a way that makes sense. You're able to justify that decision because of new, up-to-date information that's arisen during your training session. Another reason or another way that you could go off, you could do more, is simply for enjoyment or simply for pleasure. Let's say, for example, the program says that you have to do a bench single at 120 kilos. Just one set of one at 120. Before some back off work. Maybe you got to do, 3 sets of 8 later at, 100 kilos or something, whatever. Anyway, you do the 120 for one, and it's bloody easy. And your best ever, your PB is 122 and a half. You do 120 and it's flies. It feels so easy. And you might decide on the day to go off program to do something that your coach didn't tell you to do and go and do 125 kilos for one to hit a new PB. And then you go off and continue and do your back off work. Now, is that the best thing to do in terms of like the broader picture of your program? Maybe not, again, depending on context. But if it's a new PB, if you've got a reason to justify it, if you're feeling stronger than normal on that day, maybe, man, ride the wave and take advantage of that and hit a new PB, because after all, that's what you're training for. It's to improve, to hit new PBs. Again, that depends on the context. If you've got a bigger plan ahead of you, and if you're preparing for a meet or something and you've got some certain like undulating load type of peaking system that you've got going on, I wouldn't recommend doing this then. But again, with more up-to-date information, maybe doing that little bit heavier weight was more appropriate for the situation that you're in. The third way that we can go off program is by doing something different, and this is probably my favorite way to change your training, or at least the most important way to understand that you can change your training. There are many reasons why you might need to do something different. The most obvious and most common is pain or injury, but other things like convenience or like availability of equipment is also valid. Let's say in your program, it says to do, let's say like a leg press, right? Leg press 3 sets of 12 at the end of your squat program, to get some leg hypertrophy in. But the leg press machine is taken. There's only one in the gym and there's a guy on it and he's going to be there for 20 minutes and you don't have much time, you want to go home. You might decide then to go do something different, to go do some leg extensions and some lunges or something. Or let's say the program says to do some pull-ups, but you're in a different gym that day, or you're training from home and you don't have a pull-up bar. Maybe you decide to do something different. Maybe you decide to do some barbell rows, or another exercise that kind of is similar enough that achieves a similar outcome or a similar goal that isn't quite exactly what was on the program. Let's say the program says that you should be doing Bulgarian split squats for 3 sets, and you do the first set or you do a warm-up set and your knee is killing you, it hurts, and you're like, man, this is really weird. Didn't hurt my knee didn't hurt last week, but today it's hurting. You might change. Instead of doing a rear foot elevated split squat, you might do a static lunge, or you might do a front foot elevated split squat and go like, oh, this doesn't hurt. I'm just going to do this today. You simply report back to your coach. Hey coach, I changed this exercise because on the day I had new data, I felt something different, and I thought that this would be a better a better solution. In those contexts, I totally see it being okay. I mean, if you're in pain doing your main lifts, like you're trying to do your squats and there's something that's inhibiting you from it, it mightn't be appropriate to like just can them, because, your squats are obviously a main lift. You want to really do your best to work around it to try to make it fit. You really want to do your main lifts. But especially when it comes to secondary lifts, variants, or accessories, there might be more elegant solutions to the problems that arise as you do your training. Now, with all of this in mind, it's important to understand that, if you want to be in a position to make changes to your program, the most important thing is that you have a clear understanding as to what the outcomes are that you're after, or that you and your coach are after, with each part of your program. For example, if you've got in your program, 3 sets of 12 dumbbell bench press, odds are that is in there simply for the sake of hypertrophy, right? It's there to put on muscle. So if you're training and you don't have access to dumbbells and instead you replace them with push-ups, like I said before, you're still achieving the same outcome. If your program says to do front squats for, whatever, and your knees are hurting, and instead you decide to do like, a goblet squat or something that's similar, you might be achieving the same outcome. But if you're doing front squats for some other reason, maybe as a strengthening exercise, or maybe to strengthen your upper back, and then you go do leg extensions, well, you're not really achieving the same outcome. So that kind of change probably doesn't make a lot of sense. Again, depending on the context with which you're in. So that's why it's very important that you have an understanding, or you communicate with your coach, or if you wrote your own program, you have a clear understanding as to why there are things in your program. So if the time comes and you need to make changes to your program, you're able to do so in a way that's beneficial, in a way that's productive, and in a way that sticks to the bigger picture of the plan, that sticks to the direction with which you're trying to go. So, in conclusion, there are a few things that I want to say. Firstly, going off program can be a little bit taboo because some people are really committed. They just want to do what their program says. There are times that that's good, because those people tend to be, dedicated. They like to stick to a plan. They like to execute. They don't want to feel like a failure. But what I'm saying today is that going off program doesn't mean you're a failure, or doing less or changing an exercise doesn't mean you're a failure. It means that you're coming up with a more elegant solution or a more appropriate training dose based on how you're feeling on new data that's arisen during the week or during the day. Secondly, that changing your training program might be the right thing to do in context. So again, like some of those examples I used before, changing an exercise or doing less reps or more weight or something like that might actually be the correct move. Oftentimes a client will say to me, hey bro, I did this differently, or I did more, or I did less, or whatever, I made a change. I hope it's okay with you, or I hope you're not mad. And 9 times out of 10, I'm like, totally fine. Like, oh, you didn't have dumbbells at home and instead you did push-ups? That's fine. If let's say the exercise was dumbbell bench press. Because it's still achieving a similar goal. You're still getting in the outcome that you're after, or you're actually getting a better outcome. Anyway, that's all I've got to say about that. I do hope you found parts of this video helpful, and I do hope you have a bit more of an understanding as to why programs ought to be flexible and malleable, how you can go about making some small changes to your program as you go through it. If you have a coach that you work with, I highly recommend speaking to them and asking them a little bit more about why there are certain things in the program, or if you have an inkling that there are going to be times when you need to change stuff. Say, for example, you might train at 2 different venues. You might go to one gym on certain days, another gym on other days, and that sometimes there might be a case where you have to swap, or I don't know, something like that, and there's a machine that you don't have access to. Bring that up ahead of time so you can find out from your coach, okay, what changes should I make if this comes up? Or, those types of conversations are very helpful. So, hope you've enjoyed that. If you've got any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. I'll do my best to get back to you. Otherwise, have a good day. Bye. Oh, that wasn't so good. Okay. In your... Fuck me. Fuck, this is so hard. Okay. Today we're going to just... Oh my God. About how to go off...